Mr. Desai?
Yes,
Yeah, we will be beginning the lecture. Good evening.
sure.
So over to you, Dr. Samya.
Yeah. So, good evening, everyone. We are starting today's lecture. Welcome to this guest lecture on rights of women post amendments to the Hindu Succession Act 2005. This is part of the family law lectures. Family law lecture series that we have started, and we are happy to have here with us Mr. Satyajit A. Desai, who is a senior advocate of the High Court of Gujarat. Before I welcome him and introduce him, I would also like to introduce the topic. So this particular topic of Hindu Succession Act and amendments in the same is a very interesting area of law that has seen many changes, and it is part of this entire larger project of bringing in gender equality within family laws, and just as this has been happening in the area of Muslim law, Christian law, Parsi law. So in Hindu law as well, there have been many areas of reform that have happened from the pre-independence time onwards. So 1937, for example, we had the Hindu Women's Right to Property Act, which for the first time perhaps made certain inroads in the otherwise Mitakshara Kopasnari law, which had existed, which did not give much rights to women within a Kopasnari. They were not really, they were not Kopasners, and even to widows of Kopasners, it was only a right of maintenance and residence that they had. So the 1937 Act, in that sense, was a milestone that started making an inroad into this otherwise very, very patriarchal and gender unequal legal setting. And then we had the 1956 Act, Hindu Succession Act, which was largely spearheaded by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. As we all know, the Hindu Code Bill, it was part of the Hindu Code Bill, and his whole idea was to bring about certain kinds of reform and make it more progressive, and particularly on women's rights issues. But there were, of course, two opposing areas of tension. I mean, one was the conservatives who wanted to hold on to certain kinds of tradition and culture as part of the identity of the Hindu joint family and the Mitakshara Kopasnari. And then there was, on the other side, people who wanted to make it more progressive and more gender equal. So what we have in the 1956 Act is one step forward. And that then in the 2005 amendment, which gave equal Kopasnari right to daughters within a Hindu joint family, it took that law reform process forward in terms of bringing about gender equality. Now, this 2005 amendment has been the subject of various judgments in terms of its interpretations, and advocate Satyajit Desai is going to discuss with us and explain to us these various amendments and the recent judgment which has come in, which is Vinita Sharma versus Rakesh Sharma. This is a new interpretation. There have been various interpretations of this 2005 amendment, We had Danamma versus Amar, which gave a particular interpretation. Prakash versus Pulvati, which was another important judgment. And now we have Vinita Sharma versus Rakesh Sharma. So Advocate Desai is going to talk to us about what are the implications of this particular judgment, Vinita Sharma versus Rakesh Sharma, which is the latest, on which many of you would have read about it, you would have heard about it in the news. It has been an area that has been covered by the electronic media quite a bit in recent weeks. So this is a contemporary issue on which we are hoping to get further clarity from senior advocate Mr. Satyajit Desai. So let me now introduce him formally. Mr. Desai practices in the High Court of Gujarat on the constitutional, original, as well as the appellate side since 1988. He is well known as the revising author of the legal classics such as Mulla's Hindu Law and Justice S.T. Desai's Indian Partnership Act. I'm sure many of you are using these standard textbooks as part of your courses as well. In August 1999, Mr. Desai was invited to attend a working session on the Hindu Succession Act at Pune under the aegis of the Law Commission of India, where he, as the chairperson of the working session, proposed changes in the draft legislation relating to the Hindu Succession Act. The changes were then recommended to the government by the Law Commission of India, and it eventually culminated in the 2005 amendment to the Hindu Succession Act. Later, he was invited by the Law Commission of India in 1988. He was invited by the Law Commission of India in 2018 to give an opinion on the impact of the Supreme Court judgments upon the joint Hindu family and co-partnery. Mr. Desai, his areas of practice include constitutional matters, matters in the civil appellate side, company matters, matters under commercial laws, and under the Industrial Disputes Act. So we have with us an extremely well-read and somebody with expertise in a range of laws, and somebody with very, very special expertise in Hindu Succession Act, whose work has been recognized by the Law Commission of India and the government of Law Commission of India as well as the government of India. And we are happy to have with us such an expert to talk to us more on this issue of Vinita Sharma versus Rakesh Sharma and its implications on the Hindu Succession Act 2005 amendments. So before I welcome him, I just want to request all of us who are here to turn off our audio and video and follow the usual decorum that all of us do in our classrooms, in our online classrooms. So any questions, comments, please feel free to type it in the chat box, and Advocate Desai will answer the same after he gives his lecture. So with that, I hand over the mic to Advocate Desai. Welcome, sir, to Jindal Global Law School and to UP Jindal Global University, and welcome to this Family Law Lectures series.
Thank you, Professor Uma. Real pleasure to be here today amongst all of you. And as you said, the start of your Family Law Lecture series, I'm happy that I am the torchbearer here, so to say. Now, the subject that we are about to discuss is, of course, as you rightly said, a very current and a hot topic right now because of various interpretations put by the court. But before we go to that, let us try and understand a little bit about what the Hindu co-partnery was I'm trying to take you back to more than 100 years or 200 years right now. What was the Kopasnari and why did it come about? Earlier, there was in fact no concept of separate property at all. Any work that was done, any business or commerce that was undertaken by a person was actually that by the whole family. All the males of the family would pitch in together, do the work, bring in the fruits, bring in the profits, and all that would be divided. The fruits would be divided, so to say, so as to look at or take care of the upkeep of the family. There was, in fact, no concept of separate property at all. After many years, of course, that concept was recognized that a Hindu individual could have his separate property. There were different rules under the Shastric or the old Hindu law for that. But what we are right now concerned with is, of course, co-partnership property. As I said, only one concept, joint property, nothing else. Here, what were the rights of females is the actual issue. Females, as such, did not have any co-partnership rights in the family at all those many long years back. What right they had was a right to be maintained out of the family funds. So their upkeep, everything about the women was taken care of by the male members of the family. They did not have other rights, say to demand certain things from the family like a partition or a share of the property. It was a male dominated thing. Then what happened? As was pointed out by Professor Uma, uh, there was in those days, you can say, a big change in 1937. The Hindu Women's Right to Property Act came into being. Now, what did that act do? That act gave to a limited extent certain rights to a Hindu widow. Now, what was that right that was given? Upon the death of the husband, she could get that portion of the husband's property and she could even deal with or dispose of that property for herself. But there too there were limitations. What were the limitations? She could dispose of that property only for legal necessity and some such things. If it was later on found upon a challenge that that was not for legal necessity, then such an alienation would be set aside. That, of course, went on for quite a number of years, but a big and a huge change was brought about when the Hindu Succession Act was brought in 1955. Section 6 of that act is what we are concerned with right now. What did the old Section 6 say? Old Section 6 was formulated in such a way that, as we all know, under Shastric Hindu law or old Hindu law, there was this concept of ownership by survivorship, meaning thereby that if one co-partner died, the property would not go to his heirs. It would go literally to the other co-partners by way of the concept of survivorship. But so far as this act was concerned, and especially Section 6 of the Succession Act was concerned, I would right now call it the old Section 6 because after the amendment, things have changed. The old Section 6, what did it say? That suppose a Hindu co-partner of a Mitakshara family died, leaving behind him a female heir or a person claiming through a female heir, then she could lay a claim to the property. Of course, she did not become a co-partner by virtue of that, but she could lay a claim to the property. And a concept of deeming fiction was introduced a deeming partition was introduced. Why is that? And what were the implications? Suppose a Hindu died leaving behind him his wife. I am just quoting one person here, a wife. Then she could either choose to remain with the family without getting her share of the property, without undertaking or going through a partition, because she had a right to file a suit for partition. Now, normally, who has a right to partition? A co-partner. This act, when it was formulated and put into place, gave a new right to the wife, that she could actually seek a partition, take away her own share, and go away from the family. But suppose she chose to remain with the family, then the family continued as it is, and she also continued. The only difference being that her share, as on the date of death of her husband, was fixed. There, it could not change at all. So, suppose in future there was a partition, her share was sacrosanct, it was left aside, and a partition would result so far as the other co-partners were concerned. Now, this, of course, the old Section 6, as I say, came in for interpretation before the courts time and again. Various matters were decided by high courts. The issue, of course, also travelled to the Supreme Court. On different occasions, different interpretations had been given even by the Supreme Court. But the best interpretation, according to me, that was given was somewhere in 1985 in the case of State of Maharashtra versus Narayan Rao. And what did that decision or that judgment hold? It said that there is no doubt that the right of a female heir to the interest by her in the property gets fixed on the date of death of a male member under Section 6 of the Act, but she cannot be treated as having ceased to be a member of the family without her volition. Now, please mark the words without her volition, as otherwise it would lead to strange results which could not have been in contemplation of Parliament when it enacted that provision. So, very, very clear words stated by the Supreme Court. What was the effect of the words? As I said, the portion of the Hindu widow gets fixed, and thereafter she has a right to seek a partition. That is, of course, absolutely voluntary, as was held by the Supreme Court. And as I had also commented later on, which I will come to later, it is not as if the legislature through that section said that the partition will take place. It was a concept of deeming fiction, and a deeming fiction can only go so far and no further, as has been held by the Supreme Court time and again. So therefore, rights were recognized, the right to a deeming partition was recognized. Otherwise, you see, if it was held that immediately a partition takes place, then that would be something that even the legislature had never contemplated. Because normally, what does the legislature do? Now we are going into legislative territory for 1 minute. If the legislature wanted that immediately upon the death of a co-partner, a partition will take place, legislature would obviously and clearly have stated so. It would not have let it go into an interpretative process by the courts, surmises and conjectures. No, cannot happen. Legislature would have been absolutely clear in that. Now, if we travel further from that judgment, State versus Narayan Rao, we straight away come to one judgment, one decision of the Supreme Court in the case of Uttam versus Subhag Singh. But before we go into that, it is, of course, I would reiterate that partition is a voluntary process. it's not automatic. Now, what happened in Uttam versus Sobhak Singh? Ultimately, the court, upon interpretation, held this, that in order to determine the share of the Hindu male co-partner who is governed by Section 6 proviso, a partition is affected by operation of law. Mark the words. Partition is affected by operation of law immediately before his death, and thereafter it was held that in this partition all the co-partners and the male Hindu's widow get a share in the joint family property, and the co-partnery would cease to exist. That is what was held in the judgment of Uttam versus Sobhak Singh. Now, I had the opportunity of commenting upon the judgment through Mullah's Hindu Law, of course, and that comment, of course, runs into about three and a half pages, where I soundly criticize the judgment upon the issue what I have told you about right now. Because if the legislature wants that a partition takes place, there would be a clear indication. There was no clear indication. I have stated in Mullah's Hindu Law that that is only a giving provision, a voluntary thing. Because what is partition and how can a partition take place in law? It can take place by only two modes. One is voluntary act of parties by, say, entering into a partnership deed, getting it registered, and all the co-partners thereafter cease to be co-partners, the property ceases to be co-partnery property, everyone takes their share and goes away. Now suppose one or more of the co-partners wants to go out of the co-partnery. The other co-partners are not agreeing. What would be done? The other mode was, of course, by filing of a partition suit. And no court can actually prevent a partition suit, because once that intention is expressed, you can say that a partition, the beginning of the partition process has taken place. After that, what would happen? After adjudication by the court, the shares of the various co-partners would be carved out, and that is how a partition would take place. So, according to me, Uttam versus Sobhak Singh is and was always wrong. And I'll also try and demonstrate to you when we come to the latest judgment as to what the Supreme Court has actually done about this without referring to Uttam versus Sobhak Singh. So, as I have said, what happens is, so far as the old Section 6 is concerned, to put it in modern, today's words, there would be a lock-in of the share of the widow. Thereafter, her action is voluntary. Either she remains with the family without demanding her share, or she seeks a partition and goes out of the family. These are the only two things that can happen. Now, let's talk about the amended Section 6, or that is the section after the 2005 amendment. I would like to refer to a couple of other judgments also here. See, law is always a process of interpretation. The issue under this arose before various high courts, but in one case, that is the case of Vaishali Satish Gavnekar's case, I would call it, which came up before the Bombay High Court, a very strange interpretation was given by the High Court. If I put it in very basic terms, what did that judgment hold? It said that because of the language of the section, only those females who are born after 2005 will be given a right as a co-partner. Now again, there is a little bit of history. I will digress a bit here. There's a little bit of history here. And since I am a bit concerned with that, I'll try and go into it. What did happen was, after the judgment was delivered, again I criticized it very soundly in Mullah's Hindu Law. But look at the development thereafter. A learned single judge of the Bombay High Court, before whom certain second appeals had also come up on the same issue, there was a group of second appeals. He actually disagreed with the view taken by the division bench. But because he was sitting as a single judge, what did he do? He referred the matter to a larger bench. The then Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court, Justice Shah, formulated a full bench, and ultimately that full bench held that the decision in Vaishali's case was set aside and that the amendment would be applicable to all females regardless of when they were born. So that portion at least was clear. Now, if we come to the actual section, the amended section, what does it say? It says that on and from the commencement of the Hindu Succession Act, Amendment 2005, now mark the words, the daughter of a co-partner will have all the rights that the sons had, that the other co-partners had, and will also have the same liabilities. So rights and liabilities, everything in pari materia, even to the females. So she would have the same rights, she would also have the same duties and the same liabilities. That is what the section is all about. Going further, the section also spoke about what is a partition and how should a partition be considered proper. The legislature also gave a cut-off date, that partitions which had taken place before the 20th of December 2005, I believe, 2004, were sacrosanct. They were not to be touched at all. Otherwise, what would happen? It would lead to very disastrous results with, say, partitions which had taken place validly before that. If they were opened up, then again the courts would be flooded with various suits. Say, daughters claiming that this partition had taken place in 1970, it was not proper. Reopen the partition and give us our share. So those results would have been disastrous. That is why the legislature came out with the concept of a cut-off date, that partitions before that are not to be touched. Something else that was done by way of the section with which we are not concerned right now, but because it was there in the section, I just refer to it for a minute. There is a concept of pious obligation in Hindu law. Now, what is pious obligation? That the son has to honor the debts of his deceased father. Suppose the father had passed away and he had left behind some debts, then the son has to honor those debts. That concept of pious obligation has been done away by way of the amendment. And why is that? The reason is that it is not the personal liability or responsibility of the son, but the whatever share that the father would have had on his death, that would go towards fulfillment of the liability without the son being in any way personally responsible. So the personal responsibility of the son by way of pious obligation was done away with. That is the other thing, other important thing that was there in the section. Various courts took up the issue as and when it came up before them. The Andhra Pradesh High Court, the Bombay High Court, as I just now pointed out. So many high courts had issues on the interpretation of the amended provisions of 2005 under the Hindu Succession Act. What did happen? Let us see. A matter which was referred to by Professor Uma, Prakash versus Phulvati, reached the Supreme Court. After interpreting the provisions, what did the Supreme Court do? The Supreme Court said this, that the the interpretation of the section is that, just a second. The interpretation of the section is that it would be applicable to living daughters of living co-partners. Therefore, not only has the daughter to be alive, of course, she has to be alive in order to be a co-partner, but that the father has to be alive on the date that the amendment came into being. Now, why did the Supreme Court say so? The reason here, according to me, is very clear. That is because of the opening words of the section, which said that on and from the date of the amendment, now please mark the words, the daughter of a co-partner. Wrong choice of words may be by the legislature, but the moment they said daughter of a co-partner, the Supreme Court interpreted it as that the co-partner has to be alive. Now this actually goes to the very root of the matter as to how is a co-partnery formed. A co-partnery is formed by anyone being born into the family. The moment a person is born into the family, he becomes a co-partner. After the amendment of 2005, daughters are also included. So, birth into the family leads to you being a co-partner and not otherwise. There is no concept that the father has to be alive, and there never was such a concept. What would such an interpretation actually lead to? If I digress a bit and take you to the Dayabhag system, you will immediately realize that probably the Supreme Court mixed up and probably the learned judges had that in mind. It's difficult to get into the mind of judges, but I personally feel that is what might have prompted them actually. By saying that the father had to be alive, please take note of what happens in the Dayabhag system, which is prevalent in West Bengal. There, under the Dayabhag co-partnery, the father is the current holder. It is only upon the death of the father that the co-partners, the sons, get their share. It is thereafter up to them as to whether they want to continue as co-partners or whether they want to divide the co-partnery property and go their own ways. So probably the concept of Dayabhag was tried to be imported into the Mitakshara system by virtue of that judgment. That was clearly wrong, and such an interpretation could not have been there. That judgment, of course, also held, going into the provisions of partition, that partition, so far as partition is concerned, if a partition has taken place earlier and it is proper, then it is not to be touched. Otherwise, disastrous results would be there. So that is what was held by the Supreme Court in Prakash versus Phulvati. To repeat, father must be alive. Carrying that forward, as was pointed out again by Professor Soumya Uma, the case of Vinita Sharma versus Rakesh Sharma was there before the Delhi High Court. That reached the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, noticing the differences of opinion, but before that, there was another judgment delivered by the Supreme Court where the court, even while referring to Prakash versus Phulvati, gave a different interpretation as to what the Mitakshara co-partnery actually was after the amendment of 2005. It said that daughters born at any time are co-partners and left it at that. They, of course, also interpreted the provisions leading to partition. But in the case of Vinita Sharma, the slightly different views in Prakash versus that judgment were noticed by the Supreme Court by a division bench. Ultimately, that led to something very rare, at least so far as family law is concerned. The matter was referred to a full bench. And we all know what the full bench has decided, but let us see what the full bench has now said. It said that statutory fiction is with respect to the extent of the share of the deceased co-partner in the exigency provided in the proviso to 6. As the case may be, does not come to an end by statutory fiction. They were speaking of the old section 6 here. Now, without actually setting aside the judgment in Uttam versus Sobhag Singh, while holding, so far as the old section is concerned, old section 6 is concerned, the Supreme Court has said that that statutory fiction is only a fiction and cannot lead to a partition, probably echoing the exact words that I had used in Mulla's Hindu law. And therefore, you can say that that judgment of the Supreme Court under the old section 6 is overruled impliedly. That is my interpretation, because they have not referred to it as an obiter. They have referred to it in a substantive way, not naming the judgment, but they have referred to the old provision in a very substantive way, and therefore, according to me, that judgment also stands overruled by the present judgment in Vinita versus Rakesh. Now, so far as the interpretation of the current provision is concerned, what has the Supreme Court said? The judgment that I referred to, of course, was Danamma versus Amar, that is in 2018. Judgment of Justice Sikri. Now, I'll just like to take you to what the Supreme Court has actually held in the reference. They said that the provisions contained in substituted section 6 of the Hindu Succession Act confer a status of co-partner upon the daughter born before or after the amendment in the same manner as the son, with the rights and liabilities, as I just pointed out a while back. Rights can be claimed by a daughter born earlier, but with effect from 9th of September 2005. Since the right in co-partnery is by birth, it is not necessary that the father co-partner should be living as on 9th of September 2005. See, so here Prakash versus Pulvati is overruled. Then they said that the statutory fiction of partition created by a proviso to section 6 of the Hindu Succession Act as originally enacted did not bring about actual partition. So substantively it is held. Therefore, the judgment in Uttam versus Sobhag Singh is obviously now gone. Further, it has been held that in view of the rigor of provisions of explanation of section 6(5) of the Act, a plea of oral partition will not work. Now please look at this. Section came into force 9th of September 2005. It spoke about the earlier partitions not being touched. But what has the Supreme Court done here? By virtue of an interpretation, of course, they have held that oral partitions are no longer recognized. That was earlier recognized in Shastric Hindu law. Even under the old law, it was recognized that there is an oral partition. Other modes of partition, of course, were also recognized, say partition by a deed. But what has the Supreme Court done here actually. The Supreme Court has said that even if the earlier partition was not as per the provisions of this section, then such a partition was no partition in the eye of law. And why has the Supreme Court said this?